The salt spray, a cool mist against weathered skin, clung to the air. Sunlight, diffused by the Atlantic haze, painted a muted glow over the rough-hewn timbers of a ship, its sails drooping like tired eyelids. On board, a small band of individuals, their faces a mixture of hope and apprehension, gazed towards a distant, verdant shoreline. They were not the first to seek a new beginning on this vast, untamed continent, but their journey, and its ultimate fate, would etch a peculiar, enduring question into the nascent tapestry of American history. This was the year 1590, and the English were attempting to establish a permanent foothold, a venture that, despite its careful planning and earnest intentions, would soon become shrouded in an enigma that has persisted for centuries. To truly understand how this came to be, we must first examine its origins, the initial seeds of this ambitious undertaking, and the complex web of circumstances that led these colonists to this particular, now legendary, island. The story of the Roanoke colony, or rather, the mystery of its disappearance, is not a singular event, but rather a culmination of preceding voyages, shifting political landscapes, and the sheer, unyielding ambition of individuals seeking fortune, faith, and a foothold for England in a world dominated by Spain. To approach this unfolding puzzle, we must first cast our minds back to the latter half of the 16th century. England, under the formidable Queen Elizabeth I, was a nation on the rise, flexing its nascent naval power and casting a watchful eye towards the burgeoning colonial efforts of its continental rivals, particularly Spain. Spain, with its vast empire in the Americas, had established a significant presence, amassing wealth and influence that England could only aspire to. Sir Walter Raleigh, a courtier, adventurer, and a man of considerable vision, emerged as a pivotal figure in England's nascent colonial aspirations. He was a man deeply invested in the potential of overseas ventures, seeing them not only as a means to enrich the crown and himself, but also as a strategic imperative to counter Spanish dominance. Raleigh received a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I in 1584, granting him the authority to explore, colonize, and govern any lands in North America not already occupied by Christian nations. This charter was a significant document, empowering Raleigh to undertake what would become the ambitious and ultimately perplexing Roanoke expeditions. The initial reconnaissance voyages were crucial. In 1584, Raleigh dispatched 2 ships, commanded by Captain Philip Amadas and Captain Arthur Barlow, to explore the North American coastline. Their mission was to scout for suitable locations for settlement, assess the resources available, and, importantly, establish initial contact with the indigenous populations. Amadas and Barlow sailed into what is now the Outer Banks of North Carolina, a chain of barrier islands that offered both a natural defense and a potential gateway to the mainland. They were struck by the beauty and abundance of the land, describing it in glowing terms, filled with many goodly woods, fair meadows, and fruitful soil. They encountered the Croatan people, a Native American tribe who inhabited the region, and their initial interactions were reportedly friendly. Barlow's account, written upon his return to England, painted a picture of a paradise, a land ripe for English settlement. Fueling further enthusiasm for the endeavour, following this promising reconnaissance, the first attempt at colonization was made in 1585. Ralph Lane, a man with military experience, led a group of approximately 600 men, soldiers and settlers to establish a colony on Roanoke Island. This expedition was not solely comprised of idealistic homesteaders. Many were soldiers, a reflection of the ongoing tensions with Spain and the desire to establish a military outpost as well as a settlement. They arrived on Roanoke Island and began constructing fortifications and dwellings. Lane's governorship was marked by a period of difficult relations with the native population. While initial contact had been cordial, the presence of a large number of English soldiers, coupled with their demands for provisions, soon led to friction. A key figure during this period was Manteo, a Croatan nobleman who had travelled to England with Barlow and had learned English. He returned with the English settlers and served as a crucial intermediary. However, despite Manteo's efforts, misunderstandings and escalating tensions, fueled by the colonists' increasingly desperate need for supplies and the perceived insolence of some of the indigenous peoples, led to skirmishes. Lane, a man accustomed to command and order, was not hesitant to resort to force. His leadership style, while perhaps intended to establish English authority, proved detrimental to building a sustainable relationship with the local tribes. The winter of 1585 to 1586 proved to be a brutal test for the Roanoke settlers. Their supplies dwindled, and their reliance on the native population for food became a source of increasing conflict. The colonists, unaccustomed to the rigors of the North American environment and facing the constant threat of starvation, grew disheartened. The hope that had propelled them across the Atlantic began to wane. A critical turning point occurred in the spring of 1586. Sir Francis Drake, the famed English circumnavigator and privateer, was on a voyage in the Caribbean. Upon learning of the Roanoke colony's precarious situation, he diverted his fleet to provide assistance. Drake's arrival, however, was not simply a benevolent act of support. His fleet was a formidable force, and his presence coincided with a period of heightened animosity between the colonists and some of the indigenous tribes, exacerbated by a recent violent incident in which the English had attacked and burned an Indian town. Facing dwindling supplies and what he perceived as an untenable situation, Ralph Lane made the momentous decision to abandon the colony. Drake provided the colonists with ships, and in June 1586, all 100-odd survivors of the 1585 expedition departed Roanoke Island, leaving behind their unfinished settlement. This first attempt at colonization, therefore, ended in a hasty evacuation, a testament to the challenges of establishing a foothold in a foreign land, the complexities of intercultural relations, and the sheer difficulty of provisioning and sustaining a remote settlement. However, the dream of an English presence in North America was far from extinguished. Raleigh, though disappointed by the failure of the first expedition, remained committed to his vision. He saw the potential of the land and believed that a more carefully planned and managed settlement could succeed. The narrative then shifts to a second, more ambitious, and ultimately more enigmatic undertaking, the 1587 expedition, often referred to as the Lost Colony. This time, the leadership was entrusted to John White, an artist and cartographer who had accompanied the earlier voyages. White was not a military man like Ralph Lane, but a skilled observer and administrator. This expedition was conceived with a different focus. It was intended to be a true settlement, not just a military outpost, and importantly, it included families, women, and children, signifying a commitment to establishing a permanent community. The 1587 expedition comprised of approximately 115 individuals, including men, women, and children. Their chosen destination was again Roanoke Island, but with a directive from Raleigh to also explore potential settlement sites further inland, specifically mentioning the Chesapeake Bay, a region considered more strategically advantageous. However, due to a variety of factors, including navigation difficulties and disputes with the sailors accompanying them, the fleet ultimately landed back on Roanoke Island. Upon their arrival in July 1587, they found the remnants of the previous settlement in disrepair. More concerningly, they discovered that the small garrison of men left behind from the 1586 expedition had either departed or met an unfortunate end. The colonists, now a group of approximately 90 men, 17 women, and 9 children, were faced with the daunting task of rebuilding and establishing themselves anew. John White's personal motivations for undertaking this voyage were profound. His daughter, Eleanor Dare, was among the colonists, and his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, was born shortly after their arrival, becoming the first English child born in the Americas. This personal connection imbued the colony with a deeper sense of hope and future. However, the practical realities of their situation were immediately challenging. The relationship with the native population was again a critical factor. The colonists sought to re-establish peaceful relations, particularly with the Croatan people, who had historically been more amenable to their presence. Manteo, the Croatan nobleman who had been to England and back, was again a key figure. He was instrumental in facilitating communication and fostering a degree of understanding. The English colonists, under White's leadership, made efforts to mend fences and forge alliances, recognizing that their survival depended on the goodwill and cooperation of the indigenous peoples. Despite these efforts, the circumstances of the colony remained precarious, their supplies were limited, and the spectre of starvation, which had haunted the 1585 expedition, loomed large. John White understood the urgency of replenishing their provisions. He recognized that to secure the colony's future, a return trip to England for supplies was essential. In August 1587, just weeks after their arrival, John White made the difficult decision to sail back to England. He left behind his daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter, a heartbreaking separation that underscored the dire need for immediate assistance. His intention was to gather supplies and return with them as swiftly as possible. He entrusted the governance of the colony to a council of 12 men, with the understanding that if they were forced to relocate, they should carve their destination onto a tree or post. Crucially, he instructed them that if they moved in distress, they should carve a Maltese cross above their chosen inscription. This detail, as we shall see, would become central to the enduring mystery. White's journey back to England was fraught with delays. The geopolitical situation was intensifying, the Anglo-Spanish War was brewing, and tensions were at an all-time high. Spain was preparing its formidable armada, a fleet intended to invade England. Consequently, England was mobilizing all available ships for its defense. John White found himself unable to secure vessels for his return voyage to Roanoke. Shipyards were commandeered, and maritime resources were diverted to the war effort. The planned quick resupply mission stretched into years of agonizing delay. Years passed. John White, stranded in England, lived with a constant gnawing anxiety for the fate of his family and the colony. He pleaded for ships, for permission to return, but the war consumed England's attention and resources. Finally, in the spring of 1590, after 3 long years of waiting, a relief expedition was mounted. It was not solely for the purpose of resupplying the colony, but also part of a larger venture by the colony's financiers to assess their investment and potential for profit. When John White finally set foot back on Roanoke Island in August 1590, the scene that greeted him was one of profound silence and desolation. The settlement was deserted. There were no inhabitants to greet him, no signs of struggle or immediate peril that he had perhaps envisioned. What he found, instead, were the empty foundations of their houses, the remnants of their attempts to build a life. The most significant and, in retrospect, chilling discovery was found carved into a palisade post. The letters C and R were clearly visible, intertwined. And further away, on a nearby tree, was the word Croatoan. Crucially, there was no Maltese cross carved anywhere, which, according to White's instructions, indicated that the colonists had not moved in distress. This was the crucial clue, the enigmatic message that would fuel centuries of speculation. Croatoan referred to the nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and the Croatan people who inhabited it. The absence of the distress signal suggested that the colonists had, by their own volition, or under circumstances that did not involve immediate peril, relocated to the island of the Croatan people. John White and his party searched the surrounding area for any signs of the colonists. They explored the coastline and the immediate vicinity of the settlement, but found no trace of them. Their search was hampered by inclement weather, and they were unable to make a thorough investigation of Croatoan Island itself. The departure of the relief ships, under pressure from the approaching hurricane season and their own commercial obligations, meant that the search was cut short. John White was forced to leave Roanoke once more, this time without his family, the mystery of their whereabouts unresolved. The fate of the lost colony of Roanoke remains, to this day, one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. Numerous theories have been proposed over the centuries, each attempting to unravel the silence that greeted John White upon his return. One of the most prominent theories is that the colonists, facing dwindling supplies and perhaps strained relations with some of the indigenous tribes, voluntarily integrated with the Croatan people. The inscription, Croatoan, strongly supports this idea. The Croatan were known to have a more peaceful relationship with the English, and it is plausible that the colonists, seeking survival and a more harmonious existence, sought refuge and acceptance among them. Archaeological evidence from Hatteras Island has revealed artifacts that suggest a period of coexistence between English settlers and the Croatan people, including European pottery shards and tools found in Native American contexts. This theory suggests a peaceful assimilation, a blending of cultures, rather than a violent end. Another prevailing theory posits that the colonists were attacked and massacred by hostile indigenous tribes. While the inscription did not bear a distress signal, it is possible that the colonists were forced to flee their settlement under duress and sought refuge with their allies, the Croatan, who were then subsequently attacked, or that the Croatan themselves were overwhelmed by other tribes who were resentful of their alliance with the English. The ongoing tensions between European settlers and various Native American groups across the continent during this period lend some credence to the possibility of such violent encounters. However, direct archaeological evidence of such a massacre on Roanoke Island or Croatoan Island has not been definitively found. A third, more dramatic, theory suggests that the colonists were dispersed and ultimately perished due to disease, starvation, or environmental hardships. The harsh realities of the North American wilderness, combined with a lack of adequate provisions and medical knowledge, could have led to a gradual decline and eventual demise of the population. The colonists were pioneers, venturing into an environment for which they were ill-prepared, and the margin for error was exceedingly slim. There are also more speculative theories, including suggestions that the colonists were killed by the Spanish, who were wary of English encroachment on their perceived territories, or that they managed to build boats and attempt to sail back to England, only to be lost at sea. However, these theories lack significant supporting evidence. The story of Roanoke is not just about the individuals who vanished. It is a reflection of the immense challenges inherent in early colonial endeavors. It highlights the precarious balance of power and resources, the complex intercultural dynamics, and the sheer logistical hurdles of establishing a sustained presence in a new world. The failure to definitively ascertain the fate of the Roanoke colonists underscores the fragility of early colonial efforts and the vast unknowns that confronted those who dared to venture into the uncharted territories of North America. The legacy of Roanoke is complex. It represents both a tragic failure and an enduring symbol of the earliest attempts by Europeans to establish a permanent presence on the North American continent. It serves as a potent reminder that history is not always about clear-cut victories or definitive answers, but often about lingering questions, about the silent spaces in our collective memory. The whispers of the lost colony continue to echo through the windswept dunes of the Outer Banks, a timeless enigma inviting us to ponder the fate of those who sought a new beginning and, in the process, became lost to history. The detailed accounts, the careful notes of explorers like John White, even in their incompleteness, provide us with glimpses into their lives, their hopes, and their struggles, allowing us to connect with them across the centuries, even as their ultimate destiny remains shrouded in the mists of time. The very act of recounting these details, of piecing together the available evidence, is a way of honoring their journey, of keeping their story alive, even in its unresolved state. The methodical approach to historical inquiry, the careful examination of every fragment of evidence, is what allows us to approach such profound mysteries, to understand the context, and to appreciate the immense difficulty of their undertaking, all while maintaining a calm and steady contemplation of the past. The detailed narrative of their preparations, their voyages, their struggles, and their eventual disappearance offers a wealth of information, a rich tapestry of facts that, when presented in a calm and measured way, can indeed provide a soothing immersion into the distant past.